the record button and start sharing. Okay, so anyway, so this is the layer which energy is passed up, okay? We have some basic levels, okay? Does anybody know what the first trophic level in a place always is? You're going to have your primary producers, okay? So, and I guess maybe the first thing we should talk about is we have these two types of organisms. You have producers, okay? Can anybody tell me what a producer is?
Like plants.
Yeah. So like plants are a great example. Producers are organisms that can produce their own food, okay? And there's pretty much two types of producers. There are plants, and then there are things like cyanobacteria or phytoplankton. Okay, so those are things that do photosynthesis. All right, and so those are going to be our producers. Now, in every single ecosystem on the planet, you are going to need to have primary producers, okay? And these are going to be organisms that produce their own food and are eaten by other organisms. Okay, so around here, what is going to be the main primary producer? What do...
Like flowers and plants and stuff.
Well, it's going to be grass, okay? A lot of grass for the most part. That's what deer are going to be eating. You're going to have some of your bushes. But yeah, all your plants, that is the primary producer. That's your first trophic level, okay? Then we have consumers, okay? Consumers cannot make their own energy, need to eat other organisms for energy. Okay, and so what is going to be the next, after we have our primary producers, you're going to have your primary consumers. Okay, what do you think primary consumers are?
Like
Animals.
animals that eat the primary producers.
Yes, okay, so these are going to be organisms that only eat primary producers. Okay, so what kind of, are these going to be carnivores, herbivores, omnivores?
Herbivores.
Yeah, these are going to be herbivores. Okay, so things like deer, mice, squirrel, okay? All of those sorts of things, okay? So you're going to have your primary producers. Those get eaten by your primary consumers. Now, once you have your primary consumers, what comes after primary consumers?
Secondary consumers.
Exactly, secondary consumers. So secondary consumers, these are going to be organisms that eat primary consumers, okay? Now they also might eat some producers, like dogs are carnivorous, but I'm sure all of you guys have seen your dogs eat grass at some point, right? All organisms do need to have some sort of, something like that to get into their diet. But these secondary consumers, they eat primarily the primary consumers, okay? So these are going to be things like wolves, coyotes. Now, wolves that might actually fit into a tertiary consumer, which means it's like the next level up, and you can keep having levels. But for the most part, you really kind of only think of this as like primary, secondary. Maybe you get to that third level, okay? So wolves, coyotes, things like eagles and hawks, all right? All of these things they get their energy from eating other organisms, okay? And so these are going through the trophic levels. You have your first trophic level, the producers. Second trophic level, primary consumers. Third trophic level, secondary consumers, and so on and so forth, okay? Is this making sense to everybody? Does anybody have any questions? All right. So while we're kind of here, I'm going to, let's see. I'm going to stop sharing this screen for a second, and we are going to, I'm going to pop something up real fast. That way you guys can look at it. So let's type in web. All right. Image. This will work. Alrighty. So we have two different things that you can look at when you are talking about how organisms kind of work, all right, in terms of how they eat things, okay? So let's make a food chain, okay? So would somebody tell me any sort of primary producer?
Grass.
Perfect, okay. So let's start with grass. All right, now, what is then going to eat the grass? Give me a primary consumer.
Here.
Deer, you want to go deer? Okay. So then we have a deer. And then we need a secondary consumer, so something that'll eat the deer. Anybody? People, sure. People are secondary consumers, so humans, okay? This right here, where it goes grass, deer, humans, this is a food chain, okay? Food chains, we are only looking at the relationship between, that's not how you spell relationship, between select organisms in an ecosystem, okay? But are deer the only thing that humans eat?
No.
No, right? We eat a lot of different things. And so if you want to look at a whole ecosystem, you probably wouldn't use a food chain. Food chains are great for looking at a relationship between just humans and deer, or grass and deer, and all those sorts of things, okay? But what you want to look at when you're looking at a whole ecosystem is this thing called a food web, all right? And so this is kind of how all of this works, all right? We have right here at our most basic level, and you can kind of see this move up the levels, right? What are our primary producers in this ecosystem, in this desert ecosystem? There's three.
The grass, star cactus. No, yeah, grass and star cactus and bacteria.
Nope, so the bacteria are way up at the top. So you actually just star
Oh,
cactus, grass, and cactus, okay? And so you can see this arrow goes up to the kangaroo rat. This arrow also goes up to the rabbit. This arrow goes up to the grasshopper, and this arrow goes up to the bacteria. Okay, so the bacteria in this setting, you can kind of throw out the bacteria because the bacteria break down everything, all right? But really it's these three things are our primary producers, okay? Now, when you have an arrow that goes from one thing to the next, so like this star cactus goes from here to the kangaroo rat, that means that the kangaroo rat is eating it, okay? What two things, again, kind of forget about the bacteria. What two things eat the kangaroo rat?
A hawk and a tarantula.
Yeah, the hawk and the tarantula eat the kangaroo rat, okay? You can see that these, so what would that make the hawk and the tarantula?
Secondary consumers.
They are secondary consumers, okay? Now, the hawk might actually be a tertiary consumer, that next level up. Why do we say that?
Because it's the third highest in the chain.
Yeah, and there's a couple of reasons you can see that, okay? So the kangaroo rat gets eaten by the tarantula, making that a primary consumer, and then the rattlesnake can eat the tarantula, okay? Making the rattlesnake a secondary consumer. All right? So we have that. Did it not? Oh, I thought it showed that the hawk ate the whatchamacallit, the rattlesnake as well, because hawks can, okay? But anyway, so the grasshopper gets eaten by the lizard, which is a primary consumer. Hawks eat lizards, making it a secondary consumer. So really this is saying that the rattlesnake and the hawk are the secondary consumers, okay? So these two things can eat pretty much anything. And I would say that the hawk would maybe be a tertiary because it can eat rattlesnake as well, all right? Because everybody's seen hawks eat snakes before. Does anybody have any questions though? And you can see when you draw these out, there's pretty much a first layer, a second layer, all right? The rabbit kind of gets bumped up because, you know, less things eat it. The tarantula and the lizard do not eat those. Then you have your primary consumers, secondary consumers, okay? So you can see these trophic levels do kind of get naturally made when you have different organisms in each of those levels, okay? Are you guys seeing how this works? Does anybody have any questions? Okay. If nobody has any questions, I'm going to stop sharing this page right now. Rylan, you just got here. Do you have any questions about anything?
No.
Okay. And so, let's see. The next thing that I want to talk about is going to be these things called ecological pyramids, okay? All right. And there are pretty much 3 different types of ecological pyramids that we use, okay? Let me find a good one. Quick note, producers, the real scientific name for producers is autotrophs, okay? So autotroph is a good name for those, means that they make their own food. Another one is so consumers are also known as heterotrophs. We need to eat things, okay? And so what I want to show you guys now is the ecological pyramids, okay? And so we have ecological pyramids right here, and there are 3 main ones, okay? This middle one, the biomass pyramid, is maybe not the most important one. It's probably the least important out of all of these, but these will all make sense here, just in a little bit, okay? So when you have organisms, right? Okay, can you guys mute yourselves? Thank you. Somebody's all scratchy. All right, perfect. So when you have organisms, and you guys can just put your answer in the little chat thing, okay? Do we have more deer usually, or do you have more wolves? Let's go with those two things. So let me see the chat. You're going to have more deer. That is correct. Okay. The reason that you have more deer is because if you do not have the deer, right, to support the number of wolves that you would have, then the wolves will die because the wolves will starve. Okay. And so that's where you can look at this thing called the pyramid of numbers. Okay. This shows the number of organisms in each level relative to the next one. So we're going to have the most number of organisms at the very bottom of our pyramid. Remember, pyramids are wide at the bottom, they have a large base, and they get smaller as they go up. Okay, so we're going to have the most number of grass and flower and all of those primary producers right down here at the bottom. Okay, then you're going to have less primary consumers than you would primary producers. This is because these things in this next level up, your herbivores, they need to eat a certain amount of grass each, okay? And so you're going to have less primary consumers than you would primary producers, okay? Then the next level up, you'll have less secondary consumers than you would primary consumers. This is because right here they're using a bunch of different snakes, right? It's not like you have a one-to-one. So a snake eats one rabbit and it's good, okay? Snakes need to eat several different mice and rabbits and all those different types of rodents to keep them full, to keep them from starving, okay? So you need more per layer or less per next layer up, okay? So you have more in the layer below. And then at the very top, our tertiary consumers, we're only going to have a couple of eagles here, okay? Because eagles, they can eat some of these things, they can eat some of these things, but there is only so much to go around, okay? And so the numbers pyramid, each step you go up in that trophic level, there's going to be less per level, okay? So you're going to have the most primary consumers, or sorry, the most primary producers. The second most will be your primary consumers. The third most will be your secondary consumers. You're not going to have very many tertiary, and this is why there's hardly ever anything as like a quaternary or that next level up, okay? Usually we are just having a couple of layers, okay? It's only so many trophic levels. Then we're going to have our biomass pyramid, this one in the middle. This represents the amount of living organic matter at each trophic level. The greatest biomass is normally at its base. Okay, so again, if you have 1,500 grams of grain, that should be able to support about 500 grams of chicken, which should be able to support about 50 grams of human tissue, okay? Chickens need to eat more grain, and then humans need to eat more chicken, okay? So it's less per step. And that's pretty much due to this one over on the far left, the energy pyramid, okay? And this shows how much energy goes up from one to the next, okay? Organisms, we're not going to take all of the energy that we eat and turn it into, a new, to build muscle, or we're not going to turn it into fat storages, or if for you guys who are growing, you're not going to turn it into bones and all these sorts of things, okay? Only about 10% of the energy that you eat goes into building new tissues, okay? Most of it gets used when your body is doing the processes that it needs to live, okay? So like digestion, your heart beating, moving, electric impulses throughout your neurons, all of those sorts of things take energy, okay? So only about 10% of that is getting used to make new, more tissue, okay? And so when you have 100% of your producer energy at the bottom, 100% of the grass, of that 100% of the energy, only about 10% of that makes its way into your primary consumers, okay? And so those primary consumers are only taking about 10% of that to make more primary consumers, more rabbits, more deer, anything like that. You go the next level up, there's only about 10% of that 10%, which is 1%, okay? So you have less energy at the next level up to be used to make new things, so on and so forth, okay? And so these pyramids pretty much control everything we've got going on, all right? Whether it's numbers, total mass, or the energy, and they're all connected, okay? The reason we can only make so much mass and the reason that there's only so many organisms per level is due to the amount of energy that makes it up each level, okay? Now, does anybody have any questions? You can unmute yourself to ask a question. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen then. Okay, so are there any questions at all about whether we talked about the pyramids, the food webs, food chains? Okay, that's pretty much everything you're going to need to know about the first objective, all right? And so for the second objective, this is where it starts talking about decomposers, okay? So when we looked at that first food web, bacteria was way up at the top and everything had an arrow that pointed to bacteria. Why is that?
Because bacteria breaks stuff down.
Yeah, bacteria is one of our main decomposers, okay? And so there's a couple things you guys need to understand. So we have, for consumers, you're going to have several different types. We obviously know there's herbivores, which eat only plants, carnivores, which pretty much eat only meat, omnivores, which eat both, which is humans that fall into that category. And then you're going to have this thing called detritivores, okay? Detritivores eat detritus. Detritus is dead stuff, okay? And so those are like scavengers. Now, the big difference between a detritivore and a decomposer is that detritivores eat the dead stuff, but they don't really like break it down. Decomposers take dead things and they break them down into nutrients that get recycled back into the ecosystem, okay? So we have bacteria are a really, really, really good decomposer. Can anybody think of some other decomposers?
Worms.
Worms are a really good decomposer. There's another, Caden.
Vultures.
Vultures fall into that detritivore category. Vultures do not actually, they're scavengers, but they're not decomposers, okay? So they eat dead things, but they don't break them down, really. Timber, yeah, maggots, okay? What about,
Fungi?
what'd you say, Natalie?
Fungi?
Yeah, fungus, okay? Fungus are really good decomposers too. That's the big difference between plants and fungus, okay? Plants make their own energy using photosynthesis. Fungus are decomposers. They get their energy from breaking down things, okay? And so from that video on the second one, you should have seen how they break down organisms, put that nutrients back into the, whatchamacallit, ecosystem, and it allows it to come up and go, the nutrients from the dead organisms, the decomposers break it down, and it allows your primary producers, so your plants, all those sorts of things, to take up those nutrients to create more energy, that kind of circle of life idea, okay? Are there any questions about that? All right. And so we have our big kind of food web idea, the food chains. You understand the different pyramids. There's 3 different pyramids. And then all of that energy gets recycled when things die by these decomposers, okay? So it makes its way up the pyramid, and then that energy, whoop, gets recycled down, all right? Are there any questions about anything we have talked about so far? All right. So again, like and I'll go ahead and stop recording this. I'll put this on